Hi, it's Dwyer. Today is November the 2nd, 2017. GamblersAdvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. There's a very important article on boxingscene.com this morning. It's an interview with former heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis, where Lewis talks about what he considers to be the underdeveloped champions at heavyweight, Lewis's division. Right now, in the article, Lewis just points out that he had an extensive amateur pedigree. Other fighters like Evander Holyfield, the same thing. He laments the fact that even though Deontay Wilder, who's an unbeaten heavyweight champion, and Anthony Joshua, who's an unbeaten heavyweight champion, have Olympic medals, right? Lewis feels that these guys didn't fight long enough in the amateurs and that it shows in their professional games, right? He makes the argument that these guys, for all of their professional success, right, are still underdeveloped. They're still learning the game. Right now, let me disagree just a little bit with Lennox Lewis. It's a philosophical disagreement. I believe that you'll have a hard time in life finding a more dangerous sport than boxing. Right? Many of these guys are going to end up with CTE. Many of these guys are going to look fine until they're in their late 50s. And then they're going to suddenly have accelerated problems. Right? The health risks in boxing really can't be overstated. I've seen many men, including Floyd Patterson, the former heavyweight champion, right, later in life just fall apart mentally. Google what happened to Floyd Patterson. We don't talk about it, right? I'm telling you that many of the fighters I watched in the early 1970s, men like Jerry Quarry, damn good heavyweights, right? Ali, obviously, later in life had some health problems that I personally believe were caused by boxing. Right? So I'm a little bit nervous about telling any fighter that they need to have many amateur fights. I also believe, too, that these fighters deserve to get paid. I don't want to tell anyone that they can't get paid for a prolonged period of time as they learn their craft. Right? Let me also say, though, also philosophically, that I believe a lot of life has to do with knowing the things you don't know, right? Understanding your craft, figuring it out, right? I've seen great fighters who were young, right? But who understood the sport better than many of the fighters who were much older than them, right? Salvador Sanchez, I'm telling you, I cannot recall a time when I saw Salvador Sanchez where he was not one of the best fighters I'd ever seen in my life. And Sanchez died young. Right? Floyd Mayweather, people might recall, when he enters the ring against Genaro Hernandez in his first title fight, he insisted on wearing title gear. Look this up online. Right? Then when you saw him in the fight, you understood that this was a very advanced fighter. And what I want you to do is to look at Floyd's age at that time and compare and contrast it to the age of Anthony Joshua now and Deontay Wilder. In fact, when you look at Wilder, who's in his 30s, Joshua, who's past his mid-20s, right, and compare them to some other heavyweight champions, right, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, you're going to find that these guys are actually much older than those guys were, and I would say that Ali and Tyson were more advanced as fighters than Wilder and Joshua. I look at Wilder and Joshua, and I don't think they know what they don't know. Right? I mean, let's draw analogies to other sports. You know, on draft day here in the United States, you actually had, in the National Football League draft, a quarterback, Mitchell Trubisky, picked ahead of Deshaun Watson, Houston's quarterback right now. Right now, I gamble on pro football games, and the question for me isn't whether Deshaun Watson is the best rookie. Right now I'm asking myself the question on whether Deshaun Watson, who has not played an NFL season, he's only halfway through his first one. Right? The question for me is whether there are 5 quarterbacks in the entire league better than Deshaun Watson. This is clearly a guy who has studied his craft, who has figured things out. Right? For hardcore football bettors, there's another interesting question, because there's another guy on his team. And, you know, the question needs to be asked. We understand that Atlanta Falcon, Julio Jones, is this generation's Randy Moss. He's not as good as Moss, right? But he's physically dominant. But the question for me is whether DeAndre Hopkins, Watson's main wide receiver, has any peer at his position in football, right? You understand that Hopkins and Watson really might be this generation's Rice and Montana. I'm serious about that, right? You understand that those guys have studied the sport. Those guys know what they don't know. Don't get me wrong. What I've found with hardcore talents, Ben Simmons right now, who in 2 years is going to be better than his good friend in real life, LeBron James. Right? You notice that the great players who have studied the sport understand how much more there is to learn. I don't get that feeling with Wilder, who wants to be great. Right? With Wilder and Joshua. In other words, I think it's beyond what Lennox Lewis is talking about in terms of a lack of experience. I actually think with both of these guys, and look, I'm not calling anyone slow or stupid here, right? It's just a matter of focus and awareness. I just think that both of those guys are unaware about the parts of the game that they're missing. You look at Wilder, and you wonder, you know, he looks a lot like he did when he was an amateur. You wonder why he hasn't developed an inside game in more than 30 professional fights. I look at Anthony Joshua, and I understand he's bigger and stronger than most of the guys he's faced, but you wonder how this guy hasn't at least worked on trying to hide his upper body. Right? Let me just say, great fighters, I'm going to use the word great, like Andre Ward or James DeGale. You actually notice in fights where these guys are dominating, you'll actually notice them trying things to test themselves. Right? You'll notice these guys. Terrence Crawford. You'll notice these guys, in fights, they're winning, where they don't have to unveil plan B and plan C because plan A is working. You'll notice them working on the plan Bs, the plan Cs, and the plan Ds of their game. I don't see that with Wilder and Joshua. Right, here's Joshua fighting Carlos Takam. He's winning every round on the scorecards. He knows by round 7 that Carlos Takam needs to do something dramatic to win the fight. But you didn't see Joshua then attempt to get up on his toes, just to work on that part of his game in an actual fight. Right? You didn't see Joshua then deciding, hey, you know what? Let me flirt with fighting southpaw. Or let me try to throw combinations instead of this high guard and a 1-2. Let me try to change my punch pattern. Right? You understand that the guy, whatever gold medal he has in his closet, whatever amateur pedigree he has, whatever professional experience he has, you understood that that guy isn't that guy. Right? He's not the fighter who understands that he can't live on his fastball forever. Right? He's not the baseball pitcher who's working on adding pitches to his repertoire. Right? So you have some fastball pitchers right now. Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua. You have some fastball pitchers right now who are living on 100-mile-an-hour fastballs who don't know how to pitch. Right? Who are being compared to guys who could throw 100 miles an hour in the past. Right? A Lennox Lewis, who actually had other parts of their game that were developed. Right? Compare and contrast Lennox Lewis' jab to Anthony Joshua's jab. Folks, there's no comparison. I mean, there's no comparison. If Anthony Joshua fights David Tua, prime Tua, that would be a shootout. That would be a whoever lands first fight. Lennox Lewis fights David Tua, uses a great jab, has a decided boxing advantage, literally diffuses David Tua without blowing him out. I'm not sure if Joshua or Wilder ever developed those capabilities. Now let's talk about a guy who's underrated. He's fighting today. Right? This guy, to me, is a gambler's best friend. Right? Underrated fighter. The public seems to be overlooking him. He's what I call an uncrowned champion. Right? Has a game that's advanced. Has thought about things that many in the sport, including Wilder and Joshua, haven't developed. Right? His name is Shawn Porter. He's fighting Adrian Granados. Porter's a big favorite. I'm not sure from a betting perspective if it's worth betting on Porter. The last I looked, Porter was a 10-to-1 favorite. At those odds, the casino has drained whatever advantage you would get betting on Porter. But what I want people to do is to just think of the styles. Granados, of course, gave Adrian Broner in his last fight, right? Granados' last fight, all Broner could handle. But Granados is your standard tough guy in boxing. Right? He's a guy who comes forward and is throwing high-powered punches. Let's just say defense is not his forte. Now, by contrast, Shawn Porter, a guy who, in my opinion, I would not hesitate today. Let's break with the public narrative, right? Because that's where you make your profits. I wouldn't hesitate today taking Shawn Porter over welterweight champion Jeff Horn, because Porter is much more advanced. What I want people to do when they look at Shawn Porter is to realize that of all the fighters in the sport of boxing, you would have a very hard time finding a fighter who's more sudden than Shawn Porter. In other words, it's like a horror movie, as I like to say. You look up, Porter's across the street. You look back up, Porter is right here. He's moved 10 feet in something like a tenth of a second. And he's coordinated. His game travels with him. This is not a guy just running up to you. This is a guy who's able to keep his construct together. He's ready to throw punches with both hands. And he can quickly move in on you. Right? This is a guy who intuitively knows how to hide his upper body. In other words, he's not upright and clunky like Anthony Joshua, where you could say, oh, let me work Porter's body. You're going to have a very hard time finding Porter's body, because Porter's a guy who can get low. Porter's a guy who can bend at the waist. And he can do so in rhythm. He's not just bending and not throwing punches. No, he's throwing punches while he's bending. You want to talk about head movement. You want to talk about a guy who doesn't need a hand up to be defensive. He can actually dodge your shot without a hand up. His shoulders are constantly moving. That's Shawn Porter. But like Lennox Lewis, when Porter wants, he can take a step back. He can stay outside. He can work behind a jab. He knows how to work behind a jab. He's multifaceted. Now, boxing is a sport that turns on moments. Shawn Porter fought Keith Thurman. Great fight. We learned a lot about Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman, one of boxing's biggest punchers pound for pound, got pushed to his back foot by Shawn Porter. And what we learned was that Keith Thurman has an advanced back foot game. That slugger Keith Thurman, throwing counters off his back foot and catching Shawn Porter as Porter came inside. Now, I'm just telling you from my perspective, Keith Thurman's fight against Shawn Porter was his finest moment, right? I know Thurman's had other big moments. He beats Danny Garcia, stops Danny Garcia's unbeaten streak. Great. I'm just telling you, just from a style perspective, just from boxing and showing skills, Keith Thurman's performance against Shawn Porter in a fight that easily could have been scored for Shawn Porter was masterful. Right? Just understand, though, Shawn Porter, underrated. I think he beats Adrian Granados going away. Right? I think this is a guy who, if he wanted, could leave 147. Look at Porter's history as a fighter. He used to fight at a higher weight. And quite frankly, I would take Porter over Jermell Charlo. Now, let me say this. Charlo proved me wrong against Erickson Lubin. Right? I don't mean to diss Charlo, who's himself a very advanced fighter. All I'm trying to do here is to highlight a guy who I consider to be an uncrowned champion and to tell you that when the bell rings, Shawn Porter's on equal footing, in my opinion, with any champ at 147 pounds. Right? So keep an eye on Shawn Porter. This is the opposite of Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. Right? Those guys, again, are fastball pitchers. Right? They hit hard. They have an A game that has gotten them an unbeaten record, right? But we privately know Eric Molina had his moments against Deontay Wilder, didn't he? Right? We know Anthony Joshua didn't look that good against Carlos Takam. We know he was on the canvas against Vladimir Klitschko, who had been out the ring for more than a year. Right? We privately sense that there are fastball hitters out there. That these guys might not, in the parlance, know how to pitch. Shawn Porter knows how to pitch. This is a guy who's like Deshaun Watson, right? DeAndre Hopkins, Ben Simmons, right? Let me just say, the public gets dazzled by fastballs, right? The public has a hard time telling the difference between Alonzo Ball and a Ben Simmons, right? I believe gamblers know better. That's why Shawn Porter is such a huge favorite over Adrian Granados, right? The gamblers are watching the fastball. They're also watching the effectiveness of the off-speed stuff. I like Shawn Porter over Adrian Granados. You need to put a star by Shawn Porter's name. There's no guarantee that Keith Thurman would win a rematch over Shawn Porter. Right? If Shawn Porter were to fight Errol Spence, that'd be an interesting fight. Just understand that Shawn Porter is the better athlete than Errol Spence. Right? I know Shawn Porter is shorter. It'd be interesting how that fight would play out if Spence can't find Porter's body because of Porter's agility and foot speed. Just know that I would take Porter over Jeff Horn. Look, Jeff Horn does a lot of things well, but you can't muscle up a guy in the pocket like Jeff Horn muscled up Manny Pacquiao if the guy is more comfortable in the pocket than Manny Pacquiao is. Right? Porter's comfortable outside the pocket. He's comfortable inside the pocket. Right? So, I'm not sure if there's betting value in the play. But just as you handicap boxing long term in the hopes of a betting situation developing in the future, keep an eye on Shawn Porter. He's underrated. He's major competition for bigger names. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. If you're an NFL fan and you want to talk about Deshaun Watson or DeAndre Hopkins or Julio Jones, right? Or quarterbacks you think are better than Deshaun Watson, or quarterbacks you think Deshaun Watson's better than. Or if you want to talk about NBA basketball. If you feel there's a better 76er, I know there's a Joel Embiid crowd out there. If you feel there's a better 76er than Ben Simmons, if you think there's a better young player than Ben Simmons, this guy's beyond Andrew Wiggins, folks, then I hope you leave those comments in the comment section of this video. If you feel I'm dissing Lonzo Ball, tell me about it, right? In boxing, if you think I'm dissing Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua, tell me about it, right? If there's a fight I'm missing where Anthony Joshua actually hides his upper body, right, drops his guard and shows some elusiveness up top, tell me about it in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.